It looks like the common consensus on MCU's Avatar is, MCU's Echo. The common consensus is that it's another turd that just barely crawled out of Disney's backside. It feels pretty universal. I'm not sure anyone has praised it at all. So I stood in my digital space thinking that I was finally going against the grain. My thoughts on Echo were much more positive, even if I didn't think it reached the good tier. It was just okay. And then I realized that I had done some of the storytelling work for the writers. Have you or anyone you know ever watched or played a piece of media that has gaps in various places? Things that aren't explained clearly or shouldn't really make sense when taken on their own, I mean. And then your brain just kind of makes its own connections for those statements to make sense. You may end up attributing that to the story and thus elevate how good it is in your own head. I did this for two different things in this show: Echo's new powers and the Kingpin. So let's start with the King. He is the most interesting part of this show, bar none. Vincent D'Onofrio is reprising his role as the Netflix version of Kingpin, and whenever he's on screen, that is who I thought of. The larger-than-life, brutish, yet hyper-cunning mastermind that is basically the Thanos of New York City. With that image in mind, whenever he appears on screen, there was always a part of me wondering what he was really after. Like, there was the constant danger that if Echo responded to him incorrectly, she would suffer some major consequences. And don't get me wrong, I don't hate everything that they did with him even now, but it's also clear to me that that presence was not earned by this show. Let's take a look at all of Kingpin's scenes, starting with his return at the end of episode 3. The King has just recovered from a gunshot wound to the eye Maya delivered to him in Hawkeye. When Maya returns to her home after having her life spared at the last moment a few minutes prior, Kingpin is already waiting for her. Understandably, Maya's hackles are raised because, well, she shot him in the head and left him for dead. This is why you double tap, by the way. So if you think that he's here for revenge, that motivation is immediately thrown into question at the beginning of episode 4. Here, we get a glimpse at the life of Maya and Fisk after she has first come to New York. The main purpose of this scene is to demonstrate that Fisk does care about Maya, by having him nearly beat a man to death for treating her a bit too callously. At the end of the scene, he calls for Wesley to bring him a new suit. He doesn't want Maya to see the bloodied, barbaric image of her uncle he was now sporting, only for Maya to walk up and see him in the next second. And is she horrified? No. She actually kicks the nearly dead man herself, and the two walk hand in hand back to their limo. So there's two things about this scene. One that I like, and one that is actually detrimental to Fisk. The good part of this is what the scene does for Maya. The implication that within her was a level of darkness that matched Fisk from the outset, rather than having her groomed into it somehow, adds depth to her character. As Fisk will say later, she chose to go on the missions that were given to her. She was not forced to. She isn't some perfect, innocent little girl. That's a decent bit of nuance. I'm surprised Disney managed it in the modern era. It also shows that Fisk genuinely cares about Maya and her image of him.
Wait here, Maya. Uncle has something he needs to do.
We aren't told why, but I don't think that's necessary. The downside to this scene is that it sort of makes Fisk childish? Maybe short-tempered is the best way to describe it. It's not like he sets up some stuff behind the scenes to make it so the hot dog vendor is forced out of business or something. Fisk loses control after he sees Maya crying, walks up to the guy, and nearly beats him into paste. And funnily enough, thanks to Vincent's acting, you can tell that Fisk just lost it in that moment and let loose. This is the guy that runs the entire criminal underworld. It's a bit difficult to swallow. The next scene is of the two of them having dinner together. There's a translator present so the two can communicate, but she is dismissed after Fisk decides that Maya is ready to become one of his enforcers. They've clearly come a very long way, as Maya is several years older now. So of course, in typical mob boss fashion, the translator knows too much and gets clapped. So what's the problem with this scene? Take a look at the next one and just keep in mind what just happened. We return back to the present to find a good conversation beginning between Maya and Fisk. This conversation is taking place via some new augmented reality tech Fisk commissioned. A very cool concept, until you think about what you saw 2 minutes prior. Fisk dismissed his ASL translator, had her killed. This is well before Maya betrayed him as well, and this tech he commissioned is brand spanking new. So, how in the world did these two communicate while she was working for him? You're telling me that he knew Maya for 10 plus years and even spent time working with her, but never learned sign language?
Huh?
Didn't think of making this tech earlier. It makes Maya's statement that the translator technology is just another means of manipulation a bit more plausible, but it's still stupid as all get out. This is the Kingpin. He has zero reason to not learn at least the basics of sign. And of course, him not learning sign works directly against him, as Maya states later in the episode. Fisk has been on screen for 6 minutes and he's already destroyed. To be honest, as I was writing the script to this video, I started getting increasingly pissed that I didn't see this earlier. That's hindsight for you. But moving on, Fisk is clearly not upset that she shot him. He actually praises her. That seems odd at first, but as he said, that's how he raised Maya to be. It's a very interesting perspective for a villain. It's also the first hint that he just wants her back at his side. But I saw all of this as a manipulation for a yet unseen purpose. Again, big ups to Vincent's acting, because the writing does not convey that on its own. Every statement, every gesture seems to be a way for Fisk to work his way back into Maya's head. A way to get her to submit to his control once again. From the closing of the curtains mid-conversation, to the annoyance at Maya's family photo, to the gift of the wine, I thought this was poison. All I got from this guy was danger. And if you watch to the end, Fisk is dangerous. Dangerously petulant. The writer set up the scene so that it would be difficult to tell what his real motivation is. The effect of this is adding a form of false depth to the show. False, because it is completely undone in the following episode. False, because there is no explanation as to why he killed her father, which caused Maya to leave in the first place. You look a bit past the surface and you immediately see the earth beneath the pool. The only depth to be found in this version of the Kingpin are his motivations for becoming who he is. A control freak. Because ultimately, that's what Fisk wants. Complete control over everything and everyone he cares about. And this stems from his childhood trauma, where he took control of his life for the first time by murdering his father. The approach Echo takes to address this is in 2 scenes. The first is amazing in my opinion, and the second is, I'm not gonna hold you, it's hilarious. So when Fisk makes a second attempt to get Maya to see things his way, he comes clean about his past. He tells her that he was the one that took his father's life. Maya is understandably shocked, since he implied his father had died in an accident for years. But his next action is the most shocking. Fisk takes the hammer that he clubbed his dad with and offers it to Maya.
Free yourself. Go ahead. Free me!
Yeah, I had that same thought. This version of Fisk is so messed up that he's willing to let his niece off him just so she feels better. Man, he's talking about wanting to be freed himself. This man is depressed as hell, and that's strange to see because the Daredevil version is definitely not. Again, I thought this was another manipulative tactic to take advantage of Maya's attachment to him. That belief elevates the scene far beyond what it really is. A parental figure begging for their kid to come home. I don't know, it's just really basic to me. And this scene here, where he's waiting on the plane, Maya obviously does not go. She decides to head out on her own and leave both families. This man Fisk slams his fist in frustration, kidnaps Maya's family, and then threatens to napalm her entire damn hometown. All because she didn't want to go back with him. Remember how I said he was petulant? There is no gain in this for him. Maya wouldn't work with him either way, but I guess he was too committed to the bit. This ending ruins him totally. Even the scene where Maya gives him a case of PTSD doesn't raise it, and that is easily the best scene in the show. I was left in tears from laughter. I somehow doubt that's what the writers intended. And to cap it off with Fisk running with his tail tucked between his legs, perfection. I'm very grateful Daredevil sensed where things were going and got out ASAP. So now that we're aware the main villain sucks, did we at least get a decent hero out of the mix? How is Echo? She's okay. That's about it. Not great like Black Widow or Scarlet Witch, but we're not at Monica, they'll never know what you sacrificed. Rambeau levels of badly written either. I was actually entertained by Maya Lopez during this entire series, at least until the last 10 minutes when she fully activates her powers. Most of this part of the review is going to be ripping on her new power set, so let me start with what's actually decent. Maya's interactions with all of her family members are pretty good in every situation. They feel like people for once, and not props or cartoon characters like so much other Marvel media nowadays. This is especially relevant to Maya's uncle and grandmother, Henry and Chula. What I like about Henry is that he's clearly a very down-to-earth boss. He's been caught up in the Kingpin's criminal empire much like his brother, Maya's father, and is way too scared of retaliation to do anything about it. A very valid fear, considering what happens in episode 3 when he hadn't even gone out of his way to help Maya. So he has a clear and simple character arc. Henry goes from too afraid of losing any more to the Kingpin's machinations to being galvanized into striking out on his own. This is what happens when you rule by fear, Kingpin. Eventually, people will rebel when they realize there's nothing they can actually do to stay safe for good, which is something you'd think Fisk would know and thus prompt him to use the fear motivator sparingly. Wait, did I just think of another way this show indirectly makes Fisk dumber? Son of a... Chula is estranged from Maya since her daughter, Maya's mother, was killed thanks to Maya's father's involvement with criminal activity. So this understandably has Maya ticked and generally unwilling to communicate with her, which is a problem since Chula is the only one that can explain her new powers. They are eventually forced to talk, and I'm just happy that something like this was given the gravitas that it needed. Chula abandoning Maya due to her own stubbornness is not swept under the rug, but neither is Maya's recent behavior. The two of them do not completely make up in one scene, but it sets the stage for later growth. It's a great conversation considering the rest of the show. You know, it's funny. I think the most mature thing about this series was the fact that they all generally act like humans. There was a time when that was the norm. Maybe every Marvel series needs to be mature from now on. But enough positivity. Let's look at why this show exists in the first place, Maya's motives. This show starts with Maya coming back to her hometown and immediately going for the smoke. This is a peaceful town, and this girl returns to blow up all their lives because she wants to be the new Queen Pin. This motivation is fucking hilarious. Something about a deaf amputee trying to become the new queen of crime with no resources and no allies is top tier comedy. And it doesn't work at all, by the way. She manages to blow up a weapons depot as a sort of win and gets clapped up in the next episode. If Fisk didn't call off the hit at the last second, she'd be dead. In fact, she's really only alive because Fisk wants her by his side, because he's had her dead to rights several times. And then there are her powers. The new, since they differ from the comics, ability that they gave her is that she is able to use the echoes of prior women in her family line. So it's something like the Avatar or One for All from My Hero Academia, but much lamer. And not only are they lamer versions of those abilities, I genuinely feel like this power set is out of place in this show. The origin of these abilities is that the Choctaw people were apparently a different species at one point. It was confusing to me, but that seems right. Some funky stuff went down and they ended up coming to the Earth's surface, which turned them into humans. There's no explanation for where these people came from. We're just supposed to accept that there were some underground mole people that rose up and became human after some calamity. I guess it fits with the folklore vibe, which may be why I find it a whatever origin at worst. Over the course of the series, Echo gets flashbacks when she's in times of need to a different ancestor that had the skill Echo needed at that moment. First, she gains enhanced strength to free herself on the train. Next is super aim, she turns into John Wick in the roller skating rink. The final ability is the only one that's actually super in some way, her mother's ability to heal living beings. Interestingly enough, the only time she uses this heal is on Fisk, which brings her into his mind for some reason. I'm thinking this represents her attempt to heal his trauma. Interesting concept, even if all it does is get Fisk to retreat because he is completely bugging when she's done. So here comes my inner nerd. These powers suck, not in concept but in execution, a state that is very typical for modern Marvel writing. As I said earlier, Echo's new abilities are a worse version of the Avatar. The reason Echo's do not work as well is because the individual powers are not well defined. When running a power set that builds through different people, that's how you make it stand out. The Avatar, for example, is well defined by having control over 4 different elements. They are naturally able to use each element individually, but can also communicate with their ancestors to borrow their powers when needed. This is usually done through the ultimate Avatar state, an amalgamation of every Avatar's ability and skill at once, but can involve a single previous Avatar as well. Aang does this with Avatar Kyoshi and Avatar Roku when in locations relevant to those incarnations. Echoes give her the most generic and undefined abilities you could think of. If we think that the first woman's ability is to establish the power transference in her bloodline, then the second's is increased strength, the third's enhanced aim, and the fourth's is healing. But like I mentioned before, the only one of these that is obviously a superpower is the last. And even if they decided to keep those abilities as is, some visual indication of what's being used would serve to make Echo stand out more. I know they made this new power system to tie Maya more into her Native American roots, but I'm miffed that they did so little with it. It would have been a lot cooler if each woman in her family line had a unique power, and I mean more unique than shoots good or lifts a little more weight. I immediately had so many ideas on how much better this concept could have been executed, and they wouldn't have even required many special effects. Seriously, even generic super soldier style abilities with a bit of flair would have been better in my opinion. Like an eye color change if you don't want to spend extra time animating. It's just disappointing. Her original powers were that of Taskmasters, and since we don't have a Taskmaster in the MCU, she'd still be unique. I think being incredibly good at martial arts would have worked better for such a grounded story as well. When we get to the end and Maya is just flipping grown men and also passing that ability to her cousin and grandmother, they never said she could do this. It's not even hinted at. It breaks that suspension of disbelief, for me at least. As it is, I don't see what they can do with Echo after this. It felt like a one and done, and most likely is, which turns this into kind of a waste of time, especially since the show doesn't really stand up on its own. Unless they're planning on putting Echo in the Young Avengers, but even the concept of that sounds lame. Anyway, thanks for listening. Stick around for more gaming and TV discussions, and stay blessed.